Hello, everyone, and welcome to IOOGO Sessions Season 2, Episode 6. Today, we're discussing a very important topic that every business owner needs to know, and that's business law. And to help us understand this concept, we have a very special guest today um, who is a startup and small business attorney. And I can't wait to present him. But before I do, I want you to remember to join the conversation at our Small Business Hub on LinkedIn. IOOGO has created this hub thinking about every small business owner who is looking for inspiration, conversation, and fresh ideas to boost your business. All right, so let's get into this topic and talk about our special guest. Kyle Kertz is a partner and co founder of Jones Kertz PLLC. He regularly forms and structures companies. He assists clients with VC investments, mergers, acquisitions, and he helps prepare contracts. He is a graduate of SMU, Dedman School of Law, and has a bachelor's degree in finance and entrepreneurship from OSU. I won't hold that against him. All right, so let's welcome to IOOGO Sessions, Kyle. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you here. And I know that you have worked with a lot of our clients and helping them. And so, you just were the perfect guest to help share your expertise and experience with all of our viewers out there who need to know about business law for their own business.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I'll tell you as far as, the basics of business law and having the foundational elements of those things, under your belt and, just knowing when to do certain things is extremely important. And, as I've said before, on other stuff we've done, it really does, it helps reduce the failure rate of these companies as well as help them grow smartly and without making the expensive mistakes early on that cost them money later on. Right.
Absolutely. And I know there's a lot of legal aspects to owning a business. So, what are some of those laws when it comes to small businesses that every business owner just needs to know about?
I think having a basic understanding of contract law is pretty essential. Obviously, when you're running a business, you're going to run. Well, most people, 99%, are going to have either an LLC or a corporation. So, understanding, the laws that govern, your ability to operate your business, in an individual state are really important. Aside from that, and like I said, when it comes to contract law, just understanding, what the contracts you've signed say, what your obligations are, making sure that you're actually reading those things, because we do run into people who, despite having, millions of dollars in sales a year, or despite having, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business coming in, they fail to understand what's in the contracts that they've signed. Right. And even at a basic level, they just sort of throw it at somebody else and let them deal with it instead of getting into the weeds and fully understanding that. Right.
Yeah, I think
Um,
as a society, we're so used to terms and conditions being thrown at us from every application that everyone just, okay, yes, I accept that. I accept that. So you're
yeah.
saying no, but when it comes to your business, no, don't just accept it. Stop and read
Right.
it for yourself.
Yeah. No, you just need to know the nuts and bolts so that whenever something does come up and you need to solve a problem, that you know exactly what you're walking into. Because a lot of times people will, it happened, just this week with us where, our clients will run into a situation where, they either let someone go or they did something that, that they probably shouldn't have. And they're looking at the contract going, oh crap, I didn't think about that when we did this. I actually told my lawyer to take that out when we really needed it, that sort of thing. But the other aspects of law that most people should be aware of are going to usually be about, labor and employment. I would say aside from contract law, that's the second most important law for, small businesses that are growing and hiring people for the first time, or growing and hiring different types of employees for the first time. Should really understand and embrace. Compliance there can save you a lot of money in the long run. I will tell you.
Sure. So, where can someone go educate themselves, especially when it comes to labor law? I feel like that's something that's more of a slightly more moving target there. So,
Right.
what's a good resource for that?
as a lawyer, I want to refrain from telling people go read the law itself, because reading the law ad nauseum, for people who are not lawyers, is not helpful, I will say. That said, it's okay to educate yourself and do Google searches, right? A lot of lawyers, especially like me, and other lawyers that do startup and small business law, have written quite a lot on some of these issues. So say, for example, that you were trying to figure out how to properly classify somebody as either an independent contractor or an employee. I bet you could Google that and Google the applicable state itself. So like independent contractor versus employee classification in Texas. And you'd probably find a number of articles that are actually not just relevant, but accurate on the subject, right? That said, when it comes to reading blogs, just remember the internet is the internet still. It's inaccurate a lot of the time. And some of these people are intentionally, withholding information and not giving you the full picture when they're writing those things out, because, they have an interest in having you actually contact them to ask them for services. But I will say, a lot of times these people who are bootstrapping it, our clients especially, they'll do their own research and come to the right conclusion. And then they'll just come to us and say, hey, based on what I've read, I need, to have a contract like this drafted up. And some of the times they're completely right about it, right? A lot of the times, though, I think, they're close to the mark, but not all the way there. And that's where, assistance from someone like us comes in. It's more a matter of identify sort of the direction you need to be going in, and then ask the professional to help you with it, right? That way it reduces the time it takes to figure out that issue, right?
Right. So if I hear you right, you're trying to be frugal with your money spending because you're bootstrapping your business. Don't completely be so frugal that you risk some implications in the future. Do some of that hard research yourself, but then hand it over to the professional to kind of take you where you need
Yeah.
to go.
So, and this happens all the time, people go, we're bootstrapping our business. Well, they bootstrap it for 2 years and then they come ask us for help. And then we're sitting there having to correct like a dozen separate issues and it's going to take twice as much money to solve that problem, solve those issues, as it would have if we had just done it before for them the first time. That said, I do want to say, I'm not trying to stay in my clients' orbits perpetually. Like, right, I'm not sitting there trying to gouge their eyes out on a weekly basis and earn our fees. There's a subtle art to just just enough law, just enough legal help to get you to where you need to be. And for example, if you needed an independent contractor agreement, just ask for an independent contractor template. An agreement template for that, so that you can just do that whenever you need to, instead of having us draft it, right?
Yeah.
But
definitely a good tip there.
Yeah. Aside from that, though, certain people who might, not have a lot of money and who might qualify for some sort of legal aid, they might be able to go to a legal aid office and get some business law help. There might be some people who do that. Though I'd say, it's better to go, it's better to go to, more of a small business attorney, somebody who's dedicated to doing that.
Right. Totally makes sense. So let's say that I haven't started a business yet. I'm just about to launch it. I've got this great idea. But I know I want to incorporate my business. So what are some of those legal requirements to incorporate my business?
So, number one, you're trying to figure out, do I start an LLC or a corporation usually? I would say a lot of businesses, they start out, 90% of them start out as an LLC, right? We use some factors to determine whether or not it makes sense to have a corporation. But if you're starting a small business for the first time and that small business is rather profit driven, then it probably just makes sense to go forward with an LLC. If you're starting a business that's going to require a ton of outside capital to really grow and scale, and you're going to have a bunch of passive investors, and at that point it might make sense to have more of a corporation, because it's just most investors are going to be more comfortable with putting their money in, right?
Right.
If you're a corporation. It also gives them greater rights, and it does a little bit more to protect the individual that's running it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other things there are, you're gonna, depending on which state you're in, you're gonna, file a document with the Secretary of State, which is going to be called either a certificate of formation or a certificate of incorporation, or in some states they call it articles of organization.
Right.
And just understanding those differences, just knowing which one to file is key, because you don't want to file the wrong entity, right?
Right.
You don't want to file for a partnership and then realize you don't need to be an LLP, you need to be an LLC, right?
So should I
So,
file that myself, or should I pay somebody like you to file that for me?
if you're asking the barber if you need a haircut, I'm going to tell you you need a haircut, right? So I would say, under normal circumstances, anyone can file, an LLC formation. Anyone can file a business formation for a corporation, right? I'm not going to sit here and say you could never do that on your own, because that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unauthorized practice of law for you to go do that yourself. That said, if you want it done right, I can advise you on literally the best practice for certain states, and or a lawyer like me can do that sort of thing. And then at that point, we go file it, we paper it all up, and then we help you get your tax ID numbers. We help you with, getting your organizational documents in place. So operating agreements for LLCs, bylaws for corporations, resolutions adopting corporate actions, and even more importantly than most of all of that is intellectual property, assignments to the company, so that anything you're inventing or creating, anything that might be proprietary, is going to be owned by the business you're starting. Which, if we, if we as lawyers, say anything to our clients, is that really IP and customers, all of that just needs to be held at the organizational level. None of that needs to be done by you personally or held by you personally, because no one, we're structuring these businesses so that eventually you could exit them if you ever wanted to, right? So 10, 5, 20 years down the road, whatever it might be, eventually you might want to cash out on it. It's about structuring that business properly so that you can do that and have that opportunity, right?
Yeah, makes total sense. So now that I've established my business and I've got this great product or service, I have to have an agreement that I, give to my clients so that they know what they're getting from my service. What are some things that I should include in that services agreement?
So most important of all is obviously going to be your fee. What are you charging? How is that made? And then you want to address invoicing and how you're going to get paid, whether that's up front or whether that's on the back end or milestone based. Service agreements can be drafted a number of different ways. We do them literally every single day of the week, almost. And I can tell you that, we see a lot of different businesses that structure it differently. So for example, a law firm service agreement is going to be structured, so that a lot of people get paid up front, and then they basically just deduct from the amount. And then if they don't use the entire amount, they can send it back to you. Right. But, for other businesses, you're going to be operating on what's called, a net 30 basis, a lot of times, which basically means, you're going to send the invoice, and then after the invoice is received by that person, they'll have 30 days to pay it before, interest and or fees, related to late fees start accruing. But the other things you need to provide for are scope of work. Obviously, you want that to be defined and clear enough for the person to understand exactly what they're getting, and especially for certain types of businesses, for example, software businesses. We oftentimes put what's called change order language in there. So, if you're custom building software and commissioning a third party to do that, you want to provide for some way to change the path forward, right? You want to provide for some way to alter the scope of work, to either enlarge it or minimize it, to either, change it entirely. And then, some of the other terms, though, I will say, what is the length of that contract, and how can it be terminated, right? Because we don't want these people, married to each other, for forever as far as service agreements go usually.
Right.
Some businesses are a little bit different though, that where it might require ongoing support.
So you mentioned it's the first thing you mentioned was that it's very important to have your pricing in there. So what happens when you decide that you want to change your pricing? You're not as profitable as you thought you'd be, and you want to increase that pricing. Do you have to send a new services agreement, or what do you recommend at that point?
So it depends on the terms of the service agreement. You want to build in some term that says, upon X number of days of notice, written notice, usually, the fee will increase to whatever it is that they're saying it is. So sometimes you can build in price increases to be done, semi-annually or annually to reflect just the increase in overall prices. And I will say, as a matter of current economics right now, the inflation rate in the U.S. as well as the growth in the rate of wages at the moment is high enough to actually have a lot of businesses in the next year are probably going to be raising prices,
Right.
because quite frankly, a dollar is just not worth what it used to be.
Right.
And people want to get paid more because they're realizing that they can't live on nothing, right? And as far as doing that goes, in the event you don't have something like that in your agreement to be able to alter your pricing, it's a simple matter of just approaching your customer. If you have a good relationship with them, a lot of people will be reasonable and say, yeah, that's fine. We can afford it, right? If they can't, then you may have to let that customer go, right? Because it's, if you're not making the margins you need to, or you're just barely breaking even on the work, then that's not sustainable. You need to
It's not
figure
a smart
something else
business.
out. Right. Yeah. I mean, and there's other clients out there for you, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, okay. So this is great. My business is growing. I've priced it right. I've got my service agreements out there, but now I have to hire employees. I know we talked about the labor contracts at the beginning. What are some of those important things in those labor contracts that I need to make sure are included?
So depending on the state that you're in, let's take Texas, for example, you want to be very clear about their relationship with you. So, if you're classifying them as an independent contractor, you want to make it very clear what their obligations are to pay their own taxes, that they're going to have to sign a 1099 form, which the company will keep on file and provide to the IRS at some point, right? You want them to make sure that they understand that they are what's called an at-will employee. In the state of Texas, that means that that person can be fired with or without cause, with or without explanation. And that person can really do nothing about it, right?
Right.
That's pretty essential to ensuring that your relationship with that person, when it comes time to end it, it ends smoothly and without negative impact to the company itself. A lot of times we're trying to avoid having to pay people unemployment benefits, and that's another key thing. We can't really handle the payment of unemployment benefits in these agreements themselves. Okay. We can't sit here and have somebody waive unemployment benefits unless, of course, they're signing something like a severance agreement when they leave. Right.
Right.
But at the same time, the other things are, how long is that person going to be working for you? A lot of times these agreements, whether it's an employee offer letter or it's an independent contractor agreement, it'll just say it'll continue until terminated by either party, right?
Right.
Which is really flexible. Some employees, though, let's say that person is being plugged into the hierarchy of the business and being, tasked to do a specific job. Sometimes we'll say, that'll last for a year or 2 years, with some options for renewals. Something to think about for companies that have a hierarchy such as that. And then other things like what they're going to get paid salary wise, what the bonus structure might be for the company. And the other things is, go ahead.
I said PTO too, I'm sure. What's their paid time
PTO
off?
for employees, independent contractors are usually not entitled to it. They just get to tell you when they're not working. And then, basic understandings of when they are supposed to come into work, right? Basic understanding of whether or not they get paid benefits, such as healthcare and 401k and dental. You need to make sure, especially with employees, that you're pretty clear about what the other aspects of their compensation are, right?
Makes
Because that
sense.
all factors into it.
What are some of the common mistakes you see with companies and their hiring policies and maybe lack of contracts, or what's the most common thing or issue that you come across?
So when it comes to hiring people, the most common issue is not having a contract for that relationship, first of all.
Hmm.
Some of these people will not even get a 1099 or a W-2 form signed or anything like that, which is problematic because you're reporting that this person works for you is essential, right? To managing your company. Whenever and also, whenever you don't have an agreement that says somebody is an employee or an independent contractor, it increases the risk that that person will argue, especially if they were classified as an independent contractor, that they'll argue that they're actually an employee to try to get unemployment benefits when they leave,
Gotcha.
right? And that's a good segue for the other common issue. A lot of times, aside from not having a contract, when it comes to classification of workers, a lot of companies, they'll sit there and say, oh, I don't have to pay employment taxes. I don't have to pay into the state unemployment, benefits, benefits system, as a part of employing this person. Therefore, I'm just going to classify them as an independent contractor, regardless of how they work for me, so that I can save money.
Right.
While you might get away with that for whatever period of time you can, eventually something's going to happen, and this is inevitable. By the way, it just happens. Years down the road, you'll get a complaint, and if you have 50 some odd employees, and they're actually classified as independent contractors and they're wrongly classified, you'll pay back taxes, you'll pay penalties. You'll have to pay a ton of money, and it'll potentially totally sink your business.
Yikes.
Right. And, I would say if you're looking at the cost of those things, just keep in mind that it's better to fully understand and pay those things whenever you're growing your business early on, as opposed to having to pay $100,000 in back taxes to the federal government because you didn't pay FICA and all the other, federal taxes. And then any state taxes as well that you might not have paid, that just mounts, and it's really difficult to fight it when it comes about. I will tell you.
Yeah. Sounds like something a business owner definitely wants to try to avoid.
For sure, you should definitely avoid it if at all possible.
Yeah. All right. So let's pause here. Just want to remind everyone that's watching us live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn that if you have any questions for Kyle, to please drop them in the comments, and we'll make sure that we take the time to answer each of them before we end this episode.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at the comments right now, so I can see if any are popping up.
Awesome. So what are the most common reasons that someone that's about to launch their business, or a business owner already, comes to you for a consultation?
They're usually asking me, if they don't have a business yet, it's usually about business formation. A lot of people, they just don't have experience with forming their own business. It's their first time. I would say 50% of our new business formations are coming from people who have never started one before. The other 50% have started one before. And while they know that they could get it cheaper on LegalZoom or something like that, they'd rather have us do it because they know that inevitably, if they use LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer or one of these other canned services, that I'll be fixing it later on. Which, by the way, I have done before, especially when a dispute comes up. Those documents do not help you as much as you would think. It helps to have somebody like me draft it, because when it's time to break up the relationship, it goes a little bit smoother without documents. But the other aspect of this is when somebody brings us an existing business and says, I need help. Sometimes it has to do with corporate cleanup. Sometimes it has to do with, just basic contracts. So they need they have a new vendor relationship, and they just need a service agreement drafted up. They need an MSA, a master service agreement, or they need, if they do software, it's a software as a service agreement. There's a whole, number of different ways we could do those sorts of things, I'll say.
Right.
And then on top of that, like I said before, labor and employment contracts. Usually they're not coming to us with issues, I would say. They're just coming to us with action items where they just need an agreement to provide for a certain situation, right?
Right.
And other than that, though, if it's financing related, then they're asking us to assist them with creating the financing documents. So
Right.
venture capital transaction and other things. But we usually don't do, I'll say we don't do a ton of litigation. So I don't see a ton of disputes, though I've helped people resolve disputes in the past. And I can tell you, we usually try to avoid, our clients ever going to court or having to arbitrate anything, because court, I will tell you, is, even if we settle for thousands of dollars, court is almost always more expensive than just doing that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. So kind of on that note, what's the best way for a business owner, especially one that's bootstrapping, to save money on legal fees? It's clearly not going to LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer, and obviously you want to try to settle things before going to court. What are some other things that that you would recommend?
So whenever you're starting a business on LegalZoom, so I get it, by the way, you don't have a lot of money, and devoting it to legal is expensive enough as it is. And so if it costs, $400 to do it on LegalZoom and $1,000 or $1,500 to do it with a lawyer, I understand the decision.
Mm-hmm.
I run a business too. This is one of several businesses that I have, actually. I will say, though, that when the time comes, if you do make that decision, just remember that eventually you'll be making enough money or have the cash on hand to be able to go clean that up. Don't let that sit around for too long. You want to make sure that you are actually getting that taken care of and solved, especially if you have multiple owners of this business. You want that relationship to be extremely clear about how the company functions, about who manages it, who has access to bank accounts, what happens when somebody leaves, and whether you can buy their stake out or not. You want to provide for all of that when the time comes. And really, we see a lot of people doing this when they're about to do a major transaction or merge an entity or take on a major financing, which is good. If you're anticipating a major financing, that money's coming in anyway. So not a big deal, really.
Yeah.
That said, I would say when you're talking to people, a good way to figure out who you need to go to, talk to 2 to 3 separate lawyers who do the same thing. You'll find when you do that sort of thing that 1 or 2 of them is going to be priced higher than the other. And usually that's based on experience and how much, overhead those lawyers have as far as employees and paralegals and other people. Right. But you'll find that one is, extremely expensive if you're, looking at 2 or 3 compared to the other usually. And then, other lawyers, they'll be flexible with you. They'll say, I can't lower the fee, but I can spread it out over a couple of months and put you on, an automatically paid payment plan. Okay. That's perfectly reasonable to do. Right. Some of these people, they will want their fee up front. So just be prepared for that. But, you can work with them. Sometimes, we've had people, even just this week ask us, is it possible you could lower that rate? And I usually tell them, not really, because, I do have overhead to cover and employees that I staff on these projects. And then on top of that, it's, I do know for a fact that, based on the price and based on my normal hourly rate, that the numbers actually work out. This is exactly how much time it would really take me to do all that sort of stuff. So just keep in mind that as with any business, the pricing is fairly precise.
Right.
It's not.
You don't go to Walmart and negotiate the cost of bread.
Right. Yeah. But that said, sometimes I can work with people before they get big enough, and then eventually they will pay those full rates. Right. I sometimes do that just because I can see that this person is on a mission. I can tell that they're ready to start their business. And the truth is, I know that they would almost be injured by using some other service. And I just want them to have the best chance possible at, creating what I call, newfound generational wealth, right? That's the mission there.
That's awesome.
And it looks like we have a question here. The question is, what are the advantages of an LLC over a partnership?
Yeah.
A partnership, technically you can file to form a partnership in most states. A partnership does not really protect you the same way an LLC does. An LLC, from a legal perspective, provides limited liability that is greater than a general partnership or a limited liability partnership. Okay. The structures are different. That said, I will say an LLC as a matter of default, and Christy, since IOOGO runs an accounting business, you can tell everybody all knows that, LLCs are taxed as a partnership as a matter of default, right?
Right. So they're taxed as unless you tell the IRS otherwise, you're actually, depending on if it's just you or a partner, but you're taxed as a sole proprietor, actually. Unless you tell them, hey, tax me as an S corp or tax me as a C corp, you will still face the higher tax bracket as a sole prop.
Exactly. And the thing that's the same about these, though, is they're what's called pass-through entities. So basically, from a legal perspective, the IRS acknowledges the existence of corporations, but tends to, from a legal standpoint, when it comes to having members pay taxes of LLCs, they tend to, sort of throw the LLC aside and look to the members that own the interest of the LLC to pay all taxes and do all those calculations. So,
Right.
But yeah, it's a good question. I would say, there are very few reasons why it makes sense to actually form a partnership, such as a limited partnership or a limited liability partnership, as opposed to an LLC. Let's say, for example, you're starting a law firm, an LLP might make sense. Let's say you're starting, an oil and gas company. A lot of oil and gas companies, for their investors, have a limited partnership entity for their investors. That's a different legal structure. And, I don't really have time to fully explain that, but those businesses tend to operate slightly differently than most other businesses, I would say.
I'm sure if anyone wants to get into the details of that, they can always contact you for a consultation.
Yeah, definitely.
So, last question I have for you is, what should I expect as a business owner on average to pay in a year on legal fees? What's reasonable, what's not? And I ask this question because, we've seen clients that, to your point earlier about go talk to 3 different attorneys and you're going to find, one of them's higher price. We've seen some that pay an exorbitant amount of fees their first year, and I hate seeing that. What's reasonable, especially that first year, because that's when you probably incur the most with all the formation documents and everything.
Right. So, when we're forming most businesses, you're going to spend somewhere around, $1,000 to, $4,000 ish, depending on the type. So, LLCs more around that $1,000 range, 3,000 to 4,000 for a corporation. Right. And then, as far as ongoing legal expenses past the formation, I would say a reasonable amount per year for most people that I've seen is about 2,500 to 5,000. Most people don't need much more than that, I would say. Even if they're running, a pretty high earning business, they're not spending much more than that on legal per
Right.
year, unless they're doing major transactions and complex work that requires a lot of attention from somebody like us. And even then, when they are doing that, they know that they're about to make a lot of money doing it. And so they know that paying those higher fees, paying us by the hour to do all that stuff instead of by flat rate is, going to get them across the finish line the way they want to be. That said, I would be smart with it. A lot of people need to trust their instincts, right? I once ran into a current client of ours that said, I paid $2,000 for a non-disclosure agreement. And I was basically like, okay, what kind was it? And somebody charged, it was a very simple short form mutual NDA. And I was like, okay, I would have just given you one for free. if I was doing other work for you. Because quite frankly, those documents, I have templates for them, because I know people will ask for them.
Right.
And, it takes me maximum to plug your information into that template, maybe, 15 minutes. That's actually pretty high. It doesn't take that long. And, the longest part of it is just saving it to my computer or saving it to our document management system under your client file and then sending you an email for it.
By the way, I'm taking notes on the time that it's taking you for my next contract request.
Okay, definitely. And so we're like, whenever you're looking at that sort of thing, if it's a 4-page contract and you're getting charged $2,000 for it, if there's no negotiation and no other drafting time, you can actually push back on the lawyer for that. That's what I would call an unreasonable fee for that sort of thing. And one thing to know, and this is not something that the lawyers will tell you, especially when they're charging those higher rates, we have to charge reasonable legal fees. Instead of $2,000, the max should really be somewhere around the $250 to $500 range for a contract like that. That said, I wouldn't use that as a baseline for all the work we would ever do. So, I recently did an asset purchase agreement, and a lot of people, you can see their eyes watering when I tell them it's going to cost about a minimum of $4,000 to $5,000 to do this, right? And what we're doing there is a little more complex, right? We're building in and negotiating a bunch of different terms and doing quite a lot, actually, to the point where it takes 10 to 12 separate documents, and it takes quite a lot of work with the client and with the other party to get a document like that across the finish line. And I basically have to do it almost for 2 straight weeks, on and off, in order to get it done, right? And so I would keep in mind that, the time it takes is very real for some of these things. To give you an idea, I start work at, 7 or 8 every single morning, and I don't pick my head up until 5 or 6. And I feel like I get very little done, despite the fact that I might send 20 or 30 separate emails and draft maybe 10 contracts a day. It just doesn't feel like a lot to me. Right. But that said, go ahead.
No, this is all great information because, I'm with you. I hate hearing about stories where you've seen someone get gouged because they don't know any different. With the, you mentioned even the formation, I've seen 10, 15K being spent on that, and it just kills me because.
See, that's 10, 15K is ridiculous. Unless, of course, let's say I was starting like a joint venture between 2 major companies and it's heavily negotiated.
Right.
And at that point, that fee is reasonable because I spent 2 months doing it. Right. That makes sense. But $10,000 for an LLC. Oh my gosh. Just use literally anyone else to do that. $15,000 to form a corporation. I've heard other lawyers and their rates that they charge. And I think most people that do what we do are charging about the same. The market rate is about the same. The documents they're providing, I've seen in some cases, are literally identical to the ones I'm providing. I'm not sure if they stole them from us. Because I've had other attorneys go, "This is really good." And I know that some people will look at that and try to steal it from me. The truth is, I take that as a compliment because it means that they're not really capable of doing what we do, right?
Absolutely.
But as far as the fees that get charged, it's okay to ask the people around you who have formed LLCs with lawyers before, who have, formed corporations with lawyers before and have had that legal work done, a question, ask them, what did you pay for this when you did it?
Yeah.
I would, keep in mind that the prices go up, and like I said, they depend on who you're working with, especially if they work at a really large law firm. In general, those fees are just going to be higher because to give you an idea, one of the partners I heard at a local law firm here in Dallas, that's one of the top 5 law firms, not just in Dallas, but in the nation, was charging $1,100 an hour to do anything.
Jeez, that's crazy.
So, but to keep in mind, they have other people on staff who are charging $350 an hour
Right.
which is very similar to what we would charge.
Right. Yeah.
So it's essential that those people who are basically project managers, the partners, delegate the work responsibly and don't hoard it for themselves, because that's how we go from a $350 contract to a $2,000 contract.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Wow. So lots of great information today. I don't see any other questions, but we will definitely keep our eye out for anyone that comes in to watch this episode after we are no longer alive, and we'll try to make sure that we still get them answered. So please feel free to drop your questions in the comments. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of the great wisdom with what it means to start a business and legally maintain your business. I think it's all been super helpful. Even if you've already been doing this for a few years, you may have been doing some of it wrong, or you may be overspending with one of those big firms that Kyle's referring to. That might be the same one that I've also seen. So be careful out there. So again, Kyle, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you, Christy, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, so we've come to the end of the episode, and I want to remind everyone to join the Small Business Hub on LinkedIn. Don't miss this opportunity to chat and share ideas with other small business owners all around the US. During the next episode, we're going to talk about developing your own business app to reach your customers on their phones. You can subscribe at ioogo.com or simply click the link that we left you in the comments, and that episode will air on November 4th. That should be 2 weeks from today at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. So thank you so much for joining me, and until next time.